They want me to sell our family home? After everything I've done for them over the years? I stared at the formal-looking letter in my trembling hands, the legal jargon swimming before my eyes. My stepson Greg's signature was at the bottom, alongside my stepdaughter Melissa's, both clearly written with firm, confident strokes. The letter outlined their concerns about my ability to maintain the property at my age and strongly urged me to sell the house and move to the Sunset Gardens retirement community, where they had already thoughtfully placed a deposit on a one-bedroom unit. At 68, I wasn't ancient, and I certainly wasn't incapable. The Craftsman-style house on Maple Avenue that I'd shared with my late husband Robert for 23 wonderful years was immaculately maintained, largely through my own efforts. The garden that Robert had loved so dearly still bloomed with the same vibrant colors as when he was alive, and the vintage woodwork gleamed from the hours I spent carefully cleaning and polishing it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I set the letter down on the kitchen table, the same oak table where Greg and Melissa had sat countless times over the years, enjoying the holiday meals I'd prepared, discussing their problems while I offered advice and support, accepting financial help when they needed it. The irony wasn't lost on me. This house that they now wanted me to leave had been their safety net, their gathering place, their inheritance to count on. What they didn't know, what Robert and I had decided 3 years ago when his cancer diagnosis came, was that our home was no longer simply property to be passed down or liquidated. It had been carefully placed in an irrevocable trust with very specific terms. I still remembered the conversation with Robert as if it had happened yesterday. We'd been sitting in the doctor's office, still processing the devastating news about his stage 4 pancreatic cancer when he'd taken my hand. "Ellie," he'd said, his voice steady despite everything, "I need to make sure you're protected after I'm gone. Greg and Melissa, they've always seen this house as their inheritance. But this is your home too. You've put just as much love into it as I have." At first, I'd dismissed his concerns. His children had always been respectful to me during our marriage, if somewhat distant. Robert had been more clear-sighted. "You don't see it because you want to believe the best in everyone," he'd said gently. "But I've watched how they calculate, how they view what's mine as ultimately theirs, just on temporary loan to us. I love my children, but I know them." Later that week, we'd met with Martin Chen, a trust attorney who had helped us create an arrangement that would protect me while still honoring Robert's wish to provide for his children. The house and most of our assets would go into an irrevocable trust. I would have lifetime rights to live in the property, and upon my death, the house would indeed go to Greg and Melissa, but not before. My phone rang, pulling me from the memory. It was Greg's name on the screen. No doubt calling to follow up on the letter, to pressure me with practiced financial advisor concern about market conditions and maximizing returns, and other phrases he used when trying to guide someone toward a decision he wanted. I let it go to voicemail. Instead, I called Patty Martinez, who had been my friend since before I met Robert. Unlike many of our other couple friends who had gradually disappeared after Robert's death, Patty had remained steadfast. At 70, she was vibrant and outspoken, a retired teacher who suffered no fools. "They did what?" Patty's indignation crackled through the phone when I told her about the letter. "After all you've done for those two? The nerve." "They say they're concerned about me," I explained, though even as I said it, I didn't fully believe it. That the house is too much for me to manage. "Bull," Patty said flatly. "Greg's wife Jennifer is a real estate agent, isn't she? And that neighborhood has skyrocketed in value. They're thinking about their inheritance, not about you." I sighed, running my fingers along the smooth wood of the table. Robert warned me this might happen. That's why we set up the trust. "Smart man, you're Robert," Patty said. Do they know about it? No, I admitted. Robert didn't want to tell them while he was ill. He said it would just create tension. During whatever time we had left. And afterward. Well, it never seemed like the right moment. The right moment is now, Ellie, Patty said firmly, before they try to steamroll you. After hanging up, I walked through the house, touching the familiar surfaces that held so many memories. The living room wall where we'd marked Tyler and Emma's heights during their visits. The small chip in the kitchen counter from when Noah had dropped Robert's hammer during an impromptu construction lesson. The window seat in the dining room, where Sophia liked to read during family gatherings. This wasn't just a house. It wasn't just an asset. It was a home filled with 23 years of memories, and I wasn't ready to leave it, especially not under pressure from stepchildren who saw it primarily as part of their inheritance. My phone buzzed with a text from Melissa. Did you get our letter? Greg and I would like to meet with you tomorrow to discuss. We've already spoken to a wonderful administrator at Sunset Gardens. The presumption took my breath away. They hadn't. Asked if I was interested in moving. They hadn't inquired about my wishes or needs. They had simply decided and expected me to comply. For a moment, I felt a flash of the same insecurity that had plagued me in the early years of my marriage to Robert. His children had been teenagers then, resentful of their father's new wife, and I had bent over backward trying to win their approval, making their favorite meals, remembering their birthdays when their own mother sometimes forgot, never disciplining them even when they clearly needed it. Robert had eventually stepped in, telling me I was being too accommodating, that I needed to establish my own place in the family. You don't have to earn their love, Ellie, he'd said, and you definitely don't have to earn your place in this house. You're my wife. This is your home, too. It had taken years, but eventually we'd reached a kind of peace. Not the warm, blended family I'd hoped for, but a respectful coexistence, or so I'd thought. I texted Melissa back, I'm available to meet at 2 p.m. tomorrow. Please come to the house. Then I called Martin Chen and arranged for him to join us. It was time to make things clear. The next morning, I took special care with my appearance. I wore my good navy dress, the one Robert had always said made me look distinguished, and the pearl earrings he'd given me for our 20th anniversary. I baked fresh cinnamon rolls, a peace offering of sorts, though I had no intention of yielding on the central issue. At precisely 2 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Greg and Melissa stood on the porch, both in business attire that seemed calculated to intimidate. Greg's wife Jennifer was with them, her real estate portfolio clutched in her hand. Ellie, Greg leaned in to kiss my cheek, his cologne expensive and overwhelming. You're looking well. Thank you for meeting with us, Melissa added, her lawyer's smile firmly in place. We have some wonderful options to show you. I led them into the living room where I'd set out coffee and the cinnamon rolls. I've invited someone to join us, I said calmly, just as the doorbell rang again. That will be Martin Chen. Your lawyer? Greg's smile faltered. Is that really necessary? This is a family discussion. Yes, I said simply, going to let Martin in. The dynamic shifted immediately with Martin's presence. He was a distinguished-looking man in his 60s, with salt and pepper hair and an air of quiet authority. Greg and Melissa exchanged glances as I made introductions. Now, I said once we were all seated, I understand from your letter that you're concerned about me managing this house. Exactly, Jennifer jumped in eagerly, opening her portfolio. The market is absolutely perfect right now for selling. The return would be substantial, and Sunset Gardens has a wonderful community of people your age. People my age, I repeated, taking a sip of my coffee. I see. Mom, Greg said. He'd started calling me that during the later years of my marriage to Robert, usually when he wanted something. We're thinking about your future. This house has so many stairs, such a large garden to maintain. We worry about you. That's very thoughtful, I said. But I'm managing quite well. My health is excellent. I have my routines, and I love this home. But it's so large for just one person, Melissa pressed. And the financial advantages of selling now would primarily benefit you, I finished for her, since you seem to be operating under the assumption that you'll inherit the proceeds. The room went silent. Jennifer's smile became fixed. Greg shifted uncomfortably. That's not what this is about, Melissa said, though her tone lacked conviction. Isn't it? I looked at each of them in turn. Let me be clear. I have no intention of selling this house. It's my home, and I'm staying here. But Dad would want, Greg began. Your father and I discussed this extensively before he died. I cut in, nodding to Martin. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Which is why we created the Maple Avenue Trust 3 years ago. Martin took his cue, removing documents from his briefcase. The house and most of Mr. Wilson's assets were placed in an irrevocable trust before his death, he explained in his measured, professional tone. Mrs. Wilson has lifetime rights to the property. Upon her death, the house or its equivalent value will indeed be distributed to you both equally, as the secondary beneficiaries. The shock on their faces would have been comical under different circumstances. An irrevocable trust? Melissa's lawyer brain clearly understood the implications immediately. Dad did this without telling us? Your father loved you very much, I said gently. But he also recognized that this was my home too, and that I might need protection for my rights after he was gone. Protection from us? Greg looked genuinely hurt, and for a moment I felt a pang of doubt. We're family. Family looks out for each other, I agreed. All members of the family, including widowed stepmothers. Jennifer closed her portfolio with a snap. Well, this has been informative. I hope it has, I said, offering the plate of cinnamon rolls. I also hope it can be the beginning of a more honest relationship between us. I've never wanted anything but to be part of this family, but that doesn't mean I'll allow myself to be pushed aside. The meeting ended shortly afterward with promises to talk more soon that rang hollow. After they left, Martin gave my shoulder a reassuring squeeze. Robert would be proud of you, he said. He worried that you might give in to pressure from them. I almost did, I admitted. Old habits of trying to keep the peace. Some peace isn't worth keeping, Martin said wisely before taking his leave. Alone in the house again, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. The confrontation I'd dreaded for years had finally happened, and while it hadn't gone smoothly, I had stood my ground. The house still felt like home, perhaps even more so now that I had defended my right to be there. My phone pinged with a text from Patty. Well, how did it go? They know about the trust now, I wrote back. They weren't happy. Of course not, came Patty's immediate response. Their plan got derailed. Are you okay? Was I? I looked around at the living room where so many family gatherings had taken place. The space felt different now. The illusion of family harmony had been shattered, but something more honest had taken its place. A certain strength I hadn't fully claimed before. I'm better than okay, I replied. I'm exactly where I belong. Later that evening, unexpectedly, my phone rang with a call from my granddaughter, step-granddaughter, technically, Sophia. At 16, she was Melissa's older child, a thoughtful girl who reminded me sometimes of Robert. Grandma Ellie? She said when I answered. Is it true you're not selling the house? That's right, I confirmed, wondering how much she knew about the situation. This is my home. Good, she said with surprising vehemence. Mom and Dad have been talking about it for weeks, how they'd split the money with Uncle Greg and Aunt Jennifer. I told them it wasn't fair. This is where we have Christmas, where Grandpa Robert taught me to play chess. They just don't get it. Tears pricked at my eyes. Thank you, Sophia. That means a lot to me. Can I still come over on Saturdays for our baking lessons? Of course, I said, my heart lighter than it had been all day. This will always be a home for you. After we hung up, I made myself a cup of tea and carried it out to the back porch. The garden was beautiful in the evening light, the roses Robert had planted blooming vividly along the fence. Above me, the porch ceiling was still the exact shade of blue that we had agonized over choosing, what Robert had called the perfect haint blue. I thought about the trust, about Robert's foresight, about the strength I'd found today. This wasn't just about a house or an inheritance. It was about claiming my place, about honoring what Robert and I had built together. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, relationships to rebuild, boundaries to maintain. But tonight, sitting on the porch of the home I had fought for, I felt a peace that had eluded me since Robert's death. I was exactly where I was meant to be. My phone began ringing at 7:30 the next morning, far earlier than anyone in the family typically called. I was already awake, enjoying my morning coffee on the back porch, a ritual I'd maintained since Robert's passing. The garden needed, attention. A few weeds had sprouted near the hydrangeas he'd loved so much, and the bird bath needed fresh water. When I saw Greg's name on the screen, I considered letting it go to voicemail again, but decided against it. Better to face whatever was coming. Good morning, Greg, I answered, keeping my voice neutral. Ellie. His tone was tight, controlled. I've been thinking about yesterday. We need to talk. I'm listening, I said, watching a hummingbird dart among the fuchsias Robert had planted for exactly that purpose. He'd spent hours on that garden bench, camera in hand, trying to capture their iridescent wings. Not over the phone, Greg said. Can I come by around 10? Just me, not Melissa or Jennifer. I hesitated. Greg alone might be more reasonable, or it might be a strategic move, divide and conquer. He was a financial advisor after all, accustomed to getting reluctant clients to see things his way. All right, I agreed finally. I'll see you at 10. After hanging up, I called Patty, who listened to the entire situation with her characteristic directness. You don't need me there as a buffer, she offered. I can be the bitter old lady friend who says all the things you're too polite to say. The offer made me smile. I think I need to handle this myself, but thank you. Just remember, that house is yours, Ellie. Robert made sure of it. Don't let them make you feel guilty for honoring his wishes. Robert's wishes. The phrase stayed with me as I prepared for Greg's visit. I found myself standing in front of the built-in bookshelves in the study, running my fingers along the spines of Robert's architecture books. He'd been so passionate about design, about creating spaces that worked in harmony with the people who lived in them. This house had been his pride and joy, not just for its craftsman details or historical significance, but for the life we'd built within its walls. A house is more than materials, he used to say. It's a vessel for living. At precisely 10 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Greg stood on the porch, looking less polished than he had yesterday. No business suit today, just khakis and a button-down shirt, his hair slightly rumpled. He looked more like his father this way, and the resemblance made my heart twist. Come in, I said, leading him to the kitchen rather than the more formal living room. The kitchen had always been the heart of our home, and it felt like neutral territory somehow. Greg sat at the oak table, his eyes moving around the room as if seeing it fresh. You've kept everything exactly the same, he observed. Not exactly. I repainted last year, and the refrigerator is new. He nodded absently, then took a deep breath. Ellie, I want to apologize for how things went yesterday. The trust was unexpected. I'm sure it was, I acknowledged, sitting across from him with my tea. Would you like some coffee? No, thank you. He folded his hands on the table. I need to be straight with you. We made some assumptions about the house and Dad's estate that were obviously incorrect. That's on us. I waited, sensing there was more. But I also think Dad made some decisions that weren't entirely fair to Melissa and me. This house has been in the Wilson family for 3 generations. My grandfather built it. This was not entirely true. Robert's grandfather had built the original structure, but it had been sold out of the family for decades before Robert managed to buy it back, in significant disrepair, shortly before we met. The renovation had been our labor of love over the first 5 years of our marriage. Your father loved this house, I said carefully, but he also recognized it as our home, not just a family heirloom. Greg shifted uncomfortably. I understand that, but surely you can see how it feels from our perspective. Dad remarries, and suddenly this family property is locked up in a trust where we can't access it until... He trailed off, apparently realizing how the end of that sentence would sound. Until I die, I finished for him. That's what irrevocable trusts do, Greg. They protect assets and ensure they're distributed according to the Creator's wishes. But that's just it. I'm not sure those were really Dad's wishes. You had a lot of influence over him, especially toward the end when he was sick. The accusation hung in the air between us. I felt a surge of anger but kept my voice level. Your father was of completely sound mind when we created the trust. Martin Chen made absolutely certain of that, as any ethical attorney would. Robert wanted to ensure I would be secure in our home for the rest of my life. He also ensured that ultimately, you and Melissa would inherit the house or its equivalent value. 3 years is a long time, Greg persisted. Why didn't you tell us about the trust after he died? It was a fair question. I took a sip of tea while considering my answer. At first, it was simply grief. I could barely manage the funeral arrangements, let alone complicated legal discussions. Then it seemed unnecessary to bring it up unless there was a reason. Until we gave you a reason, Greg said, a hint of bitterness in his tone. Yes, I admitted. Until I received a letter informing me that you'd decided I should sell my home and move to a retirement community without even discussing it with me first. Greg had the grace to look uncomfortable. That approach was Jennifer's idea. She thought a formal letter would be better than catching you off guard in conversation. Obviously, that backfired. It wasn't just the letter, Greg. It was the presumption behind it. The deposit at Sunset Gardens without my knowledge. The assumption that I would simply comply with your plans for my life. He stared at his folded hands. We were concerned about you, alone in this big house. Were you? I asked softly. Or was Jennifer looking at real estate values and you were calculating your inheritance? His head snapped up. That's unfair. Is it? Since Robert died? How often have you visited me here? Not for holiday gatherings or when you needed something, but just to check on how I'm doing. The question hung in the air, unanswered because we both knew the answer. I've been busy, he said finally. The firm has been demanding, and with Tyler applying to colleges. I understand busy, I said. I do. But please don't pretend that yesterday was primarily about concern for my welfare. Greg ran a hand through his hair, another gesture, so like his father's that it made my breath catch. It wasn't entirely about the money, he said after a long pause. But yes, that was part of it. Melissa and I both have kids heading to college. Dad always said the house would eventually come to us. And it will, I reminded him. The trust guarantees that. But we can't count on when, he countered. And meanwhile, it's just you in this 4-bedroom house with property values soaring. It seems inefficient. I couldn't help but laugh, though there was little humor in it. My life isn't a balance sheet, Greg. Efficiency isn't the goal. We sat in silence for a moment, the morning light filtering through the kitchen windows, illuminating the copper pots hanging above the island, another element of the kitchen Robert had designed with such care. "What would it take?" Greg asked finally. "To convince you that selling is the right move? We could find you something perfect. Not Sunset Gardens if you don't like it, but something more manageable. You'd have a substantial amount left over for travel, for whatever you want." "I don't want to sell," I said simply. "This is my home. The garden Robert and I planted together is here. The marks measuring Tyler and Emma's heights are on that door frame. The dent in the hall floor is from when Sophia dropped my cast iron skillet. Every corner of this house holds memories. I'm not ready to leave. Memories don't pay property taxes or fix leaky roofs," Greg said, though his tone had softened. "No, but the trust has provisions for home maintenance. Your father made sure of that." I leaned forward. "Greg, I understand your disappointment, but this was Robert's decision as much as mine. He wanted to provide for all of us, for me in the present, and for you and Melissa in the future." "Melissa's taking it harder than I am," Greg admitted. "She's talking about challenging the trust." This didn't surprise me. Melissa had always been the more stubborn of Robert's children, and as a lawyer, she'd naturally explore legal options. "That would be unfortunate," I said carefully. "Martin assures me the trust is solid, and litigation would only deplete the very assets she's concerned about, not to mention what it would do to this family." Greg nodded slowly. "I know. I've told her the same thing." He glanced around the kitchen again. "Dad really loved this place, didn't he?" "He did. It was his haven." "Mine too, when I was younger," Greg said quietly. "After Mom left, when it was just Dad and me before Melissa came to live with us. This house felt safe when nothing else did. It was the most vulnerable I'd seen Greg in years. Robert had told me about those difficult years after his first wife left, how he'd struggled to keep the household together, to be both mother and father to Greg, while Melissa remained with her mother. By the time Melissa had come to live with them as a teenager, Greg was already heading to college. "Your father told me about those times," I said gently. "How you helped him renovate the kitchen, even though you were only 12. A small smile crossed Greg's face. "I was a terrible helper. I spilled an entire gallon of primer on the subfloor. Dad just laughed and said we'd make it work." "That sounds like Robert." "It was the only time I ever heard him really laugh after Mom left. At least until..." "Until what?" I prompted when he didn't continue. Greg met my eyes directly. "Until you. Dad laughed a lot after he met you. I didn't appreciate that enough at the time." The simple acknowledgement brought tears to my eyes. In all our years together, this might have been the first time Greg had directly acknowledged the happiness I'd brought to his father's life. "Thank you for saying that," I said softly. He nodded, seemingly embarrassed by the emotional moment. "Anyway, the trust is established, and legally, there's not much we can do about it. I'll talk to Melissa, try to make her see reason." "I'd appreciate that." Greg stood, clearly ready to end the conversation. "For what it's worth, I am concerned about you being alone here. Not because of the house maintenance, but it can't be easy." "It's not," I admitted. "I miss your father every day. But I've built a life here, Greg. I have my volunteer work, at the literacy center, my garden club, friends like Patty. I'm not isolated or incapable." He nodded, moving toward the door. "I should get going. Thank you for hearing me out." At the door, he paused, looking back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "The trust. It doesn't prevent you from selling if that was your choice, does it?" "No," I confirmed. "I have the authority to sell if I decide to. The proceeds would remain in the trust, but I could purchase another residence if I wanted. So this really is entirely your decision." "Yes, and I've made it. This is my home, Greg. I'm staying." After he left, I sat alone in the kitchen for a long time, turning over our conversation. It had gone better than I'd expected. There had been a moment of real connection, a glimpse of the step relationship I'd always hoped for but never quite achieved. My phone buzzed with a text from Patty. "Still alive? Did financial advisor boy try to sell you a timeshare while he was at it?" "It actually went okay," I texted back. "Greg, at least, seems to be accepting the situation. And Melissa?" "Apparently considering legal action." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then reappeared. Finally. "Of course she is. Lawyers think everything can be solved by paying other lawyers. Want me to come over? I made lemon bars." "I'd like that," I replied, realizing I could use a friend's perspective. While waiting for Patty, I wandered through the house to the small room off the master bedroom that Robert had used as his home office. Unlike the rest of the house, which I'd carefully maintained exactly as it had been during our marriage, this room had undergone changes. I'd cleared out Robert's drafting table and architectural reference materials, donating them to the community college where he'd occasionally taught. In their place, I'd created a small studio space where I'd been attempting to recapture my long-abandoned interest in watercolor painting. It had been a difficult change to make, repurposing Robert's sacred space. But Martin Chen had encouraged it when I'd mentioned my hesitation during a meeting about the trust. "The house is yours to live in, Ellie," he'd said. "Not a museum to Robert. He'd want you to use it in ways that bring you joy." My recent paintings were modest efforts, simple studies of flowers from the garden, the view from the kitchen window, the old oak tree in the backyard. Nothing gallery-worthy, but the practice brought me peace. It was something I'd loved in my youth, abandoned during my working years as a librarian, and only rediscovered in retirement. Robert had encouraged it, buying me art supplies for my birthday the year before his diagnosis. "You have an eye for beauty, Ellie," he'd told me. "You should nurture that." I was studying one of my recent attempts, a not quite successful rendition of the Rose Arbor, when the doorbell rang. Patty stood on the porch with her promised lemon bars and a no-nonsense expression. At 70, she remained a force of nature, her silver hair cut in a stylish bob, her clothing bright and eclectic. "You look better than I expected," she announced, striding past me into the house. No visible bruises from the emotional manipulation I was anticipating. "It really wasn't that bad," I said, following her to the kitchen where she immediately made herself at home, pulling plates from the cabinet she knew contained them. Greg was almost reasonable. "Almost reasonable. High praise indeed," Patty said dryly, cutting her lemon bars into generous squares. "And what exactly does almost reasonable mean in this context?" I explained the conversation, including Greg's admission about the house's significance to him in childhood and his acknowledgement of the happiness I'd brought to Robert's life. "Well," Patty said when I'd finished, "that's surprisingly mature of him, though I notice he's perfectly willing to throw his sister under the bus as the unreasonable one." "He's trying to be a mediator," I defended him. "Melissa has always been more forceful. That's one word for it." Patty took a bite of her lemon bar. "So what's your plan if she does try to challenge the trust?" "Martin says it's extremely solid. Robert was very careful about that." I sighed, pushing my plate away. "But I hate the idea of legal battles with my own stepchildren. It would break Robert's heart." "Robert's not here," Patty pointed out bluntly. "And he created that trust precisely because he knew his children well enough to anticipate this situation." "I know, but still." Patty reached across the table to pat my hand. "Listen to me, Ellie. You've spent your entire life trying to keep the peace. With your parents, with your ex-husband from that disaster of a first marriage, with Robert's children. At some point, you have to ask yourself, what peace are you actually preserving, and at what cost?" Her words echoed Martin Chen's from the day before. "Some peace isn't worth keeping." I just wish they could understand that this isn't about cutting them out of their inheritance, I said. The house will be theirs eventually. I'm only 68. I could live another 20 years or more. Exactly, Patty said triumphantly. That's the real issue. They don't want to wait. They want their payoff now, regardless of what it costs you. Put so bluntly, it was hard to argue with her assessment. Yet something in me still wanted to believe better of Robert's children. Perhaps because believing the worst made my 23 years of efforts to build a family seem futile. I'm going to talk to Melissa myself, I decided. Woman to woman, without the legal posturing. Maybe I can make her understand. Patty looked skeptical. Lawyer Melissa, who's already talking about contesting the trust? That conversation should go well. I have to try, for Robert's sake, if nothing else. And if it doesn't work? If she persists with legal challenges or other pressure tactics? I looked around the kitchen that had been the heart of our home, remembering countless family meals, holiday preparations, quiet evenings with just Robert and me. Then I'll fight, I said simply. This is my home, and I'm not leaving it unless I choose to. Patty studied me with approval. Good. About time you showed some backbone with those two. After Patty left, I called Melissa's office. Her assistant initially tried to schedule me for next week, but I insisted on speaking directly to Melissa. After a brief hold, she came on the line. Ellie, she said, her tone coolly professional. I'm in the middle of preparation for a case. This won't take long, I assured her. I'd like to meet with you to discuss the house situation directly without lawyers. A pause. I'm not sure that's advisable at this point. I spoke with Greg this morning. He seemed open to finding a resolution that respects everyone's feelings. Another pause, longer this time. Fine. I can give you 30 minutes tomorrow at lunch. There's a cafe near my office, the Daily Grind on Elm Street. I know it, I said. Thank you, Melissa. I appreciate your willingness to talk. After hanging up, I felt a mixture of anxiety and determination. Melissa had always been the more difficult of Robert's children, coming to live with him as a rebellious teenager after her mother's remarriage, carrying a chip on her shoulder that never fully disappeared even in adulthood. Where Greg had eventually developed a cordial relationship with me, Melissa had maintained a polite distance, never openly hostile, but never truly warming either. Tomorrow would be challenging. But as I looked out at the garden Robert had loved so much, at the home we had shared, I knew it was worth the effort. Not just for my right to remain here, but for the family bonds that, however strained, were part of Robert's legacy too. The Daily Grind bustled with the lunch crowd when I arrived the next day, 10 minutes early for my meeting with Melissa. The cafe was sleek and modern, all clean lines and minimalist decor, reflecting the downtown business district where Melissa's law firm occupied the top 3 floors of a gleaming high-rise. I'd chosen my outfit carefully. A well-tailored navy pantsuit that Robert had always said gave me an air of quiet authority, paired with the simple pearl earrings he'd given me on our 15th anniversary. I spotted an empty table in the corner and made my way there, ordering a simple tea when the server approached. No need for food. I doubted I could eat with the knot of tension in my stomach. This meeting felt more consequential than yesterday's conversation with Greg. Where he had shown glimpses of understanding, Melissa had always been more rigid, more determined to maintain the divisions within our family. At precisely 12:30, she walked through the door. Even in a crowded cafe, Melissa commanded attention, tall and slim like her father, with the same direct gaze and determined jaw. Her dark hair was pulled back in a sleek bun, her charcoal suit impeccably pressed. She spotted me immediately and moved toward the table with purposeful strides. Ellie, she said, taking the seat across from me. I can only stay until 1 o'clock. I have a deposition at 1:30. Thank you for making the time, I said, meaning it. I thought it Was important that we talk directly, just the two of us. Melissa signaled to a server, ordering a black coffee without looking at the menu. When the server departed, she turned her full attention to me, her expression carefully neutral. "Greg tells me you two had a productive conversation yesterday," she said, her tone giving nothing away. "I thought so." He seemed to understand my position better afterward. "My brother has always been easily swayed by emotional appeals," Melissa observed, a slight edge to her voice. "I tend to focus more on facts and legal realities." I took a slow breath, reminding myself not to be provoked. The legal reality, as I understand it, is that your father created an irrevocable trust that gives me lifetime rights to our home, with you and Greg as the ultimate beneficiaries. There are legal precedents for challenging such arrangements when there's evidence of undue influence, Melissa countered, leaning forward slightly. Dad was very ill when this trust was created. He was ill, I acknowledged, but completely lucid and determined to arrange his affairs as he saw fit. Martin Chen took extensive precautions to document your father's mental competence, precisely to prevent such challenges. Melissa's coffee arrived, and she took a moment to add a precisely measured packet of sweetener, stirring it methodically. Martin Chen was your friend before he was Dad's lawyer. He was a professional acquaintance through the library's Legal Resource Center, I corrected, and he became your father's trusted advisor through his own choice. Convenient, Melissa murmured, taking a sip of her coffee. I felt a flash of irritation but kept my voice level. Melissa, I didn't ask to meet so we could debate the legal validity of the trust. I wanted to talk about what's really at stake here. Our family. Family, she repeated as if testing the word. That's an interesting approach considering the circumstances. What circumstances would those be? The fact that you've effectively blocked Greg and me from accessing our inheritance from our father, the family home that's been in the Wilson family for generations. I sighed. Greg made the same claim yesterday, and it's simply not accurate. Your grandfather built the original structure, yes, but the house was sold out of the family decades ago. Your father bought it back as a fixer-upper the year before. We met. We renovated it together, room by room, over the first 5 years of our marriage. With family money, Melissa added pointedly. With money your father earned as an architect, I corrected again, and with considerable sweat equity from both of us. Melissa set down her cup, her expression hardening. Let's be direct, Ellie. You were married to my father for 23 years. That's significant, I acknowledge that. But Greg and I are his children. We've been part of his life from the beginning. That house represents our childhood, our heritage, not just a property investment. I understand that, I said softly. And the trust your father created ensures that ultimately, the house or its value will come to you both. He didn't disinherit you. He simply made sure that I wouldn't be displaced from our home. At 68, you could potentially live another 20 years or more in that house, Melissa pointed out, while its value continues to appreciate beyond what Greg and I might be able to afford when we're approaching retirement ourselves. The calculation in her words was startling, in its frankness. She was essentially putting a timeline on my life, weighing the financial implications of my continued existence. Your father considered that, I said carefully. The trust includes provisions for you and Greg to receive other assets immediately, the vacation property in Vermont, his investment portfolio, the life insurance proceeds. The house was only one part of what he left behind. The most valuable part, Melissa countered, especially now with the housing market where it is. I studied her face, so like Robert's in structure, yet lacking the warmth that had always softened his features. What would he say to her now, if he could? Melissa, I began gently, what would make this situation more acceptable to you? Since selling the house isn't an option I'm willing to consider. She looked momentarily surprised by the direct question. I suppose financial equivalence might be a starting point. If you're determined to stay in the house, perhaps you could buy out our interest with other assets. The trust doesn't allow for that, I reminded her. And frankly, I don't have other assets of equivalent value. Your father and I built our life around that home. Melissa's mouth tightened. Then perhaps you should reconsider your position on selling. The proceeds could provide very comfortably for everyone, a suitable place for you, and a fair distribution to Greg and me as Dad surely intended. Your father's intentions are quite clearly spelled out in the trust documents, I said, my patience beginning to wear thin. He intended for me to have our home for as long as I wanted it, and for you and Greg to receive it afterward. That arrangement made sense when the house was worth what it was 3 years ago, Melissa argued. But property values in that neighborhood have nearly doubled since then. Circumstances change. My need for my home hasn't changed, I replied simply. We stared at each other across the table, the noise of the cafe fading into the background. I searched for some softness in her expression, some opening that might allow for genuine understanding, but found none. I had hoped we could find common ground, I said after a moment. Some way forward that respects both your father's wishes and your feelings. My feelings are irrelevant, Melissa said coolly. This is about fairness and honoring my father's true legacy to his children. His legacy wasn't just financial, Melissa. It was the values he lived by: integrity, compassion, putting family first. Exactly, she said, leaning forward. Family first. And with all due respect, Ellie, while you were an important part of Dad's life, Greg and I are his. Family in a way that you simply aren't. The word stung more than I wanted to admit, cutting to the heart of an insecurity I'd carried throughout my marriage to Robert. Despite his constant reassurance, there had always been a small, nagging doubt about my place in the family he'd created before me. Your father wouldn't agree with that assessment, I said quietly. He considered me his family in every sense that mattered. That's why he protected my right to our home. Melissa checked her watch, her gesture making it clear our conversation was concluding on her timeline. I need to prepare for my deposition. I think we've established our respective positions clearly enough. And what happens now? I asked, as she gathered her things. Will you pursue legal action to challenge the trust? She paused, meeting my eyes directly. I'm exploring all available options. I suggest you do the same. Including considering the sale? Especially that. She stood, smoothing her suit jacket with practiced precision. It would be the simplest resolution for everyone. Simple doesn't always mean right, I observed. A flicker of something, annoyance perhaps, or grudging respect, crossed her face. I'll be in touch, Ellie. I watched her stride out of the cafe, back straight, head high, every inch the confident attorney. Only when she disappeared through the door did I allow my shoulders to slump, the tension of maintaining my own composure finally breaking. The server approached, asking if I wanted anything else. I ordered a small lunch I didn't really want, needing a few minutes to collect myself before leaving. As I picked at a sandwich, I tried to make sense of the conversation. Unlike with Greg, I'd found no opening with Melissa, no shared memory or emotional connection to build upon. My phone buzzed with a text from Patty. Mission accomplished? Or should I prepare bail money? Despite everything, the message made me smile. No blood was shed, I texted back, but no minds were changed either. Did you expect anything else from Lawyer Barbie? I winced at the nickname. She's just protecting what she sees as her inheritance. At your expense, Patty replied. Immediately. Coming over tonight, bringing wine, non-negotiable. The prospect of Patty's blunt friendship was comforting. I finished my lunch and paid, then stepped outside into the bright afternoon sunshine. Rather than heading straight home, I found myself walking toward the small park a few blocks away. It was a beautiful spring day, the kind that Robert would have insisted we spend in the garden, hands in the soil, planning what new flowers to add this year. The park was busy with office workers enjoying their lunch breaks, mothers with young children, elderly couples on benches. I found an empty seat and watched a group of preschoolers chasing bubbles, their delight so pure and uncomplicated. What would it be like, I wondered, to approach life with that simplicity again? My phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. The screen showed a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was local. Hello? Mrs. Wilson? This is Daniel Porter, Melissa's husband. I straightened, surprised. Daniel and I had always had a cordial, if somewhat distant, relationship. He was a successful business executive, frequently traveling, often absent from family gatherings due to work commitments. Daniel, hello. This is unexpected. I hope I'm not interrupting anything, he said, his tone professionally pleasant. Melissa mentioned she met with you today. Yes, we had lunch, I confirmed, wondering where this was heading. Is everything all right? Actually, I was hoping we might be able to meet. There may be a way to resolve this situation that Melissa hasn't considered. My interest was immediately piqued. I'd be open to that. When were you thinking? Would later this afternoon work? Say 4 o'clock? I could come to your house, or we could meet somewhere neutral if you prefer. The offer to come to my house seemed significant. A recognition of my home territory, perhaps. The house would be fine. I'll put on some coffee. Perfect. I'll see you at 4. After hanging up, I sat for a few more minutes, puzzling over this new development. Daniel had always struck me as the pragmatic counterbalance to Melissa's intensity, more willing to compromise, less bound by rigid principles. What solution might he have that Melissa herself hadn't considered? With renewed energy, I headed home to prepare for this unexpected meeting. The house was immaculate as always. Keeping it in perfect condition had become even more important to me after Robert's death, a way of honoring his love for the place. Still, I spent some time arranging fresh flowers from the garden in the living room, putting on coffee, and setting out the almond cookies that had always been Daniel's favorite at family gatherings. At precisely 4 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Daniel stood on the porch, briefcase in hand, his silver-touched dark hair neatly combed, his suit as impeccable as Melissa's had been. He was a handsome man in his mid-40s, with an easy smile that had probably served him well in the business world. "Ellie, thank you for seeing me on such short notice," he said, stepping inside. He glanced around the entryway, his expression appreciative. "The house looks wonderful, as always." "Thank you," I said, leading him to the living room. "Coffee? Please." I brought the coffee service from the kitchen, pouring for us both before settling into Robert's favorite armchair while Daniel took a seat on the sofa. "So," I began after a moment, "you mentioned a possible resolution?" Daniel set his coffee cup down carefully. "Yes. Before I get into that, I want to be clear that I'm here with Melissa's knowledge, but not necessarily with her blessing. She thinks this is premature." "I see," I said, intrigued. "The situation as it stands creates an unfortunate impasse," he continued. "You have the legal right to remain in the house for your lifetime, while Melissa and Greg have a deferred inheritance, interest that grows more valuable with time, but which they cannot access." I nodded, waiting for him to continue. "What if," Daniel said, opening his briefcase and removing a folder, "we could create a win-win scenario, a solution that respects your right to remain in your home while providing Greg and Melissa with immediate financial benefit?" "I'm listening," I said, genuinely curious. Daniel spread several documents on the coffee table. "I've been researching reverse mortgages for seniors with substantial home equity. There are products specifically designed for situations like yours, where the homeowner wishes to stay in the home but access the equity." I frowned slightly. "I don't need to access the equity. The trust provides adequately for home maintenance and my living expenses." Understood, Daniel nodded. But what if you took out a reverse mortgage not for your own needs, but to provide an advance on Greg and Melissa's inheritance? You could distribute a portion of the equity to them now, while retaining your right to live in the house for as long as you wish. I studied the papers he'd laid out, glossy brochures from financial institutions, comparison charts of various products, even a preliminary calculation based on the current market value of my home. The advantage, Daniel continued, is that everyone gets something they value. You keep your home and your independence. Greg and Melissa receive a significant portion of their inheritance now, when it would be most useful to them. It was a clever solution, I had to admit. Not selling the house outright, but essentially selling a portion of its future value to provide immediate funds to my stepchildren. What happens to the reverse mortgage when I eventually leave the house, either by choice or upon my death? I asked. Daniel looked pleased by the question, as if I'd passed some test of financial acuity. At that point, the house would be sold. The reverse mortgage would be repaid from the proceeds, and the remainder would go to Greg and Melissa, as specified in the trust. So they would ultimately receive less than if we maintained the current arrangement, I clarified. In absolute dollars, yes, Daniel acknowledged. But they would receive a substantial sum now, when it has more value to them than a potentially larger amount decades in the future. Time value of money, he added with a small smile. I took a sip of my coffee, considering the proposal. On the surface, it seemed reasonable, a compromise that respected the letter of Robert's trust, while addressing Greg and Melissa's desire for immediate financial benefit. And yet, the trust specifically states that the house is to be maintained unencumbered, I said slowly, recalling Martin's careful explanation of the terms. I believe a reverse mortgage would violate that provision. Daniel's expression flickered briefly before returning to its pleasant neutrality. There might be ways to work around that particular clause. Trusts can often be modified if all parties agree it's in everyone's best interest. That would require court approval, I pointed out, and a substantial legal argument for why we should disregard Robert's clearly stated wishes. Robert couldn't have anticipated the current real estate market, Daniel countered smoothly, or the specific needs his children would have at this stage of their lives. I studied the man across from me with new understanding. Daniel had always presented himself as the reasonable one, the mediator in family disagreements. Now I wondered if that persona had been strategic all along. What specific needs are those, Daniel? I asked directly. He hesitated, then sighed. I suppose there's no harm in being transparent. Sophia will be starting college next year. She's been accepted to Princeton, early decision. The tuition and expenses are significant, even with the partial scholarship she's received. That's wonderful news about Sophia, I said sincerely. My step-granddaughter was a brilliant girl who deserved every opportunity. But Robert set up education trusts for all the grandchildren. Surely those funds would cover a substantial portion of her expenses. They would cover about 2 years, Daniel acknowledged. But with the way costs are rising. And what about Greg's needs? I prompted when he didn't continue. Another slight hesitation. I believe he and Jennifer are looking at investment opportunities. A vacation rental property, from what I understand. The contrast was striking. Sophia's education versus a vacation property investment. One seemed obviously more aligned with Robert's values than the other. Daniel, I said carefully, I appreciate the thought and effort you've put into finding a compromise. Really, I do. But this solution doesn't feel right to me. Robert created the trust with specific intentions, and leveraging the house with a reverse mortgage would undermine those intentions. Even if it would bring peace to the family? He asked, his tone gently persuasive. Would it? I countered. Or would it simply set a precedent that Robert's clearly stated wishes can be circumvented when convenient? Daniel began gathering. His materials, his movements deliberate. I had hoped you might be more flexible, Ellie. for the sake of family harmony. Family harmony works both ways, I said quietly. It requires respect for boundaries, not just compromise from one side. He closed his briefcase with a definitive click. Melissa won't be pleased. She was skeptical about this approach from the beginning, but I convinced her it was worth trying before. Other options. The implied threat wasn't subtle. Before? Legal action, you mean? I clarified. Daniel stood, straightening his jacket. Melissa is very good at what she does, and she feels very strongly about this matter. I rose as well, maintaining my composure despite the churning in my stomach. I'm sure she does. But so do I, Daniel. This is my home, the home Robert and I shared and loved. I'm not leaving it, and I'm not leveraging it to provide vacation, properties, or investment opportunities. Sophia's education is hardly a frivolous expense, he reminded me stiffly. No, it isn't, I agreed. And I'd be happy to discuss how I might contribute to that specifically, outside of this reverse mortgage scheme. Sophia is Robert's granddaughter, after all. This appeared to catch him off guard. You would do that? Of course, I care about Sophia, about all the grandchildren. This isn't about withholding support from family. It's about honoring Robert's wishes for our home. Daniel studied me with new consideration. I'll mention that to Melissa. I walked him to the door, maintaining the polite facade that had characterized so many of our family interactions over the years. At the threshold, he paused. For what it's worth, Ellie, I did try to convince Melissa that challenging the trust would be costly and likely unsuccessful, whatever happens next. It isn't my preferred approach. I appreciate that, I said, though I wondered if his statement was genuine or simply positioning himself as the reasonable party regardless of outcome. After Daniel left, I called Martin Chen immediately, explaining both conversations from the day. A reverse mortgage? Martin sounded both impressed and concerned. Creative, I'll grant them that, but absolutely counter to the trust provisions. Robert was adamant about the house remaining unencumbered. That's what I thought, I said, relieved to have my understanding confirmed. What about Melissa's threat of legal action? Should I be worried? Concerned, perhaps, but not worried, Martin replied. The trust is solid. Robert ensured that. But litigation is always stressful, even when you're in the right. And it would certainly strain family relationships further. They're already strained to the breaking point, I observed, gazing out at the garden where the late afternoon sun illuminated Robert's favorite roses. Would you consider a different kind of compromise? Martin asked thoughtfully. Not selling the house or taking a reverse mortgage, but perhaps setting up some kind of additional financial support for the grandchildren's education? That might address some of their concerns without violating the trust. I already offered something similar to Daniel, specifically for Sophia's college expenses. That was good instinct, Martin approved. It shows you're not simply being obstinate, but are willing to be flexible where it aligns with Robert's values. After hanging up, I sat in Robert's study, surrounded by the books and mementos he'd collected over a lifetime. What would he do? In this situation? How would he balance his love for his children with his commitment to fairness and integrity? The answer came to me clearly, almost as if he were in the room. Robert would stand firm on matters of principle while remaining generous in matters of heart. He would protect what was precious without becoming bitter or vindictive. That evening, when Patty arrived with the promised wine, I had already formed the outline of a plan. Not a surrender, but a different kind of solution that might preserve both my home and what remained of our family bonds. You look different, Patty observed as she poured generous glasses of Cabernet. More determined somehow. I am, I confirmed, accepting the wine gratefully. I've decided to stop playing defense and start being proactive. Patty raised her glass in a toast. Now that sounds like the Ellie I remember from our younger days. So what's the plan? I smiled, feeling more certain than I had since receiving that initial letter demanding I sell my home. I'm going to give them exactly what Robert would want them to have. No more, no less. The next morning, I sat at Robert's desk in the IVR study, surrounded by carefully organized stacks of documents. Financial statements, trust paperwork, education fund reports, and family photographs covered the polished oak surface as I pieced together my plan. After Patty left the previous night, I'd spent hours going through files, making notes, and calculating figures. Despite the complexity, I felt a growing sense of clarity and purpose. A soft spring rain tapped against the windows, creating a soothing backdrop to my work. The garden would benefit from the moisture, I thought absently, especially the new hydrangea bushes I'd planted last month. Robert had always loved hydrangeas. They're like nature's mood rings, he'd once said, delighted by how the flowers changed color based on the soil's acidity. My phone chimed with a text message from Sophia. "Grandma Ellie, Dad mentioned you might be willing to help with Princeton costs. Is it true? Can I come talk to you about it?" The message warmed my heart. Unlike her mother, Sophia had always reached out to me directly, maintaining our relationship independent of the tensions between the adults in the family. "Of course, sweetheart," I texted back. "How about Saturday morning? I'll make those blueberry pancakes you like." Her response came immediately. "Yes, 9:30, okay? Love you." I smiled, adding the appointment to my calendar before returning to my documents. Sophia's enthusiasm reminded me what was really at stake. Not just property and assets, but relationships and legacies. What message would Robert want to send to his grandchildren through how we resolved this conflict? By noon, I had drafted a comprehensive proposal. Not a surrender to Melissa and Greg's demands, but a thoughtful alternative that honored Robert's intentions while addressing legitimate family needs. I called Martin Chen and arranged to meet him that afternoon to review the details. "This is excellent work, Ellie," Martin said later, looking up from the papers I'd presented in his office. The rain had intensified, drumming against the windows of his downtown practice. "You've found a creative middle ground." "Will it work legally?" I asked. "Can we implement this without violating the terms of the trust?" Martin nodded, adjusting his reading glasses. "Yes, with some minor modifications. The trust gives you considerable discretion regarding the income from other assets. Robert was quite clear that while the house itself must remain intact, you would have flexibility with the investment portfolio and insurance proceeds." "And the education funds?" "Those are separate trusts with specific purposes," Martin confirmed. "But as the trustee, you have some discretion there as well, particularly regarding timing and distribution." "Good," I said, feeling more confident. "I want to present this to everyone at once. Greg and Jennifer, Melissa and Daniel, and the grandchildren. A family meeting where everything is transparent." Martin looked concerned. "Are you sure about including the grandchildren? Family financial discussions can be uncomfortable." "They're not children anymore," I pointed out. "Tyler is 17, Sophia 16, Emma 14, and even Noah is 12. They're old enough to understand that family resources come with responsibilities and values attached. Robert would want them included." Martin nodded slowly. "I see your reasoning. When do you plan to do this?" "This Sunday," I decided. "I'll host a family lunch at the house. Neutral territory, in a sense. Would you be willing to attend? Not to intimidate anyone, but to answer technical questions and confirm that everything I'm proposing is legally sound." "Of course," Martin agreed, though I suspect Melissa will bring her own legal perspective. "I'm counting on it," I said with a small smile. "I want her to understand that this isn't an emotional decision or a power play. It's a considered approach based on both legal rights and family values." On my way home, I stopped at the grocery. store to pick up ingredients for Sunday's lunch. As I debated between lamb and beef for the main course, a familiar voice caught my attention. "Ellie, is that you?" I turned to find Noah, my youngest step-grandchild, standing by the shopping cart while his father Daniel looked at something on his phone a few feet away. "Noah?" I smiled genuinely, bending to give him a quick hug. At 12, he was at that gangly preteen stage, all limbs and unexpected growth spurts. What a nice surprise. "We're getting stuff for tacos," Noah informed me solemnly. "Dad burns them, but he's trying again tonight." Daniel looked up from his phone, noticing me with visible surprise. "Ellie, I didn't expect to run into you here." "It's the closest store to the house," I reminded him, keeping my tone light despite the awkwardness of our last meeting. Noah looked between us, clearly sensing the tension. "Grandma Ellie makes the best cookies," he announced to no one in particular. "When are we coming over again?" Before Daniel could intervene, I smiled at Noah. "Actually, I'm hosting a family lunch this Sunday. Everyone's invited. You, your parents, Uncle Greg's family. Would you like to come?" Noah's face lit up. "Yes. Can I show you my new gaming thing? It's awesome." "I'd love that," I assured him, then looked at Daniel, who appeared caught off guard. "I was planning to call everyone tonight, but since you're here, lunch at 1 o'clock on Sunday. I'm making those roasted potatoes Noah likes." Daniel recovered his composure. "I'll have to check with Melissa. She might have work commitments." "I hope she can make it," I said sincerely. "It's important that everyone's there. I have something I'd like to discuss with the whole family." Daniel's expression grew guarded. "Regarding the house situation? Regarding family resources and how we move forward together," I corrected gently, mindful of Noah listening intently nearby. "Dad, can we go? Please?" Noah pleaded, oblivious to the undercurrents. "Grandma Ellie's house has the cool tree fort in the backyard." Daniel hesitated, then nodded. "We'll do our best to be there. I'll talk to Melissa." "Wonderful," I said, giving Noah's shoulder a squeeze. "I'll see you Sunday then." As I finished my shopping and drove home through the rain, I felt both apprehension and resolve. Sunday's meeting would be challenging, perhaps even confrontational, but it was necessary. The family Robert and I had built, however imperfectly, however complicated by prior marriages and step relationships, deserved a chance to heal and move forward with integrity. At home, I called Greg first, extending the invitation in the same terms. He sounded surprised but agreed readily, saying he'd been meaning to call me anyway. Then I called Melissa's cell phone, half expecting to reach her voicemail during the workday. To my surprise, she answered. "Ellie, is everything all right?" "Everything's fine," I assured her. "I ran into Daniel and Noah at the grocery store earlier, and I've just spoken with Greg. I'm hosting a family lunch this Sunday at 1 o'clock, and I hope you and your family can come." There was a pause. Is this about Daniel's proposal? Because I've already told him it was premature. "It's about finding a way forward that respects everyone's needs," I said carefully. "I've developed a proposal I'd like to share with the entire family, including the grandchildren." "The grandchildren?" Melissa's voice sharpened. "Financial? Matters aren't appropriate to discuss with children, Ellie. They're not small children anymore," I pointed out. "And this isn't just about finances. It's about family legacy and values, things Robert would want them to understand." Another pause, longer this time. I could almost hear Melissa weighing her options, calculating advantages and disadvantages as she would for any legal strategy. "Martin Chen will be there," I added, "to address any technical questions about the trust." "I see," Melissa said, her tone shifting to professional neutrality. "In that case, we'll be there. Should I bring anything?" The question was so ordinary, so domestic amid our conflict that it momentarily caught me off guard. "Just yourselves," I said. "I've got everything covered." After hanging up, I felt a small surge of victory. All 3 families had agreed to come, the first step in my plan. Now I needed to prepare the house and finalize the details of my proposal. The next 2 days passed in a flurry of activity. I cleaned the house thoroughly, prepared make-ahead dishes for Sunday's lunch, and reviewed my presentation with Martin twice more by phone. On Saturday morning, as promised, Sophia arrived for blueberry pancakes and college discussion. She burst through the door at 9:28, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun, wearing jeans and one of Robert's old Princeton sweatshirts that she'd claimed after his death. The sight of it made my throat tighten momentarily. She looked so much like her grandfather in certain angles of light. "Grandma Ellie!" She enveloped me in a hug that smelled of fruity shampoo and teenage perfume. "I'm so excited about tomorrow. Noah texted everyone that you're making your famous potatoes." "Word travels fast," I laughed, leading her to the kitchen where I'd already prepared the pancake batter. "How are you, sweetheart? Ready for finals?" Sophia hopped onto a stool at the kitchen island, watching as I heated the griddle. "Mostly. I'm stressing about AP Physics, but Tyler's been helping me. He's like scary smart with math stuff." I smiled at the mention of Greg's son. Despite their parents' differences, the cousins had maintained close relationships. "That's wonderful. How do you feel about Princeton? It's getting real now, isn't it?" Her face lit up. "I can't believe I actually got in. Grandpa Robert would have been so excited. He used to tell me all these stories about his time there." "He would have been beyond proud," I assured her, pouring the first pancake onto the sizzling surface. "He always knew you were destined for great things." As we ate, Sophia gradually steered the conversation toward the reason for her visit. "So, Dad mentioned you might help with Princeton costs. Mom didn't say anything about it, which is weird because she usually handles all the college stuff." I set down my fork, choosing my words carefully. "Your grandfather set up education trusts for all 4 grandchildren. As the trustee, I have some discretion over how those funds are distributed. Princeton is expensive, but it's exactly the kind of opportunity Robert would want to support." "But the trust wouldn't cover everything, right?" Sophia asked, surprisingly well-informed. "Dad showed me the statements once. There's enough for maybe 2 years at Princeton, less if I live off campus junior year like I want to." "That's correct," I acknowledged. "But I'm working on a plan to supplement those funds, not just for you, but for all the grandchildren. That's what I want to discuss with everyone tomorrow." Sophia's expression grew serious. "Is this about the house? Mom and Dad think I don't know what's going on, but I hear them talking. They want you to sell it so they can use the money for stuff." The directness was so reminiscent of Robert that I had to smile. "Yes, that's part of it. Your mom and Uncle Greg would prefer that I sell the house now, rather than waiting until I'm gone someday." "But you don't want to," Sophia stated, not asking. "No, I don't. This is my home, the home your grandfather and I shared. The trust he created gives me the right to live here for the rest of my life." Sophia nodded slowly. "That makes sense. I wouldn't want to be kicked out of my home either." She looked around the kitchen, her expression softening. "I love this house. All my best memories of Grandpa are here." "Mine too," I said softly. "Mom's really mad about it," Sophia continued matter-of-factly. "She keeps saying it's not fair that you get to keep such a valuable asset all to yourself, when it's technically family property." I resisted the urge to correct Melissa's characterization. "Different people can see the same situation very differently," I said diplomatically. "That's why I'm hoping tomorrow's discussion will help everyone understand each other's perspectives better." Sophia looked at me with surprising maturity. "You're not going to change Mom's mind, you know. Once she decides something's unfair, that's it." "Perhaps not," I acknowledged. "But I still need to try. For your grandfather's sake, if nothing else." After Sophia left, promising to return with her family the next day, I spent the afternoon finalizing preparations. I set the dining room table with Robert's grandmother's china, placed fresh flowers from the garden in the center, and arranged family photographs along the sideboard, visual reminders of our shared history and connections. That evening, I walked through the house one final time, checking that everything was in place for the next day's gathering. In the master bedroom, I paused before Robert's photograph on my nightstand, a candid shot taken on our 20th anniversary trip. To Italy, his face relaxed and happy as he gazed across the Tuscan countryside. "I hope I'm doing what you would want," I told his image softly, finding the balance between standing firm and extending an olive branch. Sunday dawned clear and brilliant, the spring rain having washed everything clean. I woke early, put the lamb in the oven to slow roast, and arranged fresh-cut flowers from the garden throughout the house. By noon, everything was ready, the table set, the food prepared, my presentation materials arranged neatly in the living room where we would gather after lunch. Martin Chen arrived first, precisely at 12:45. "The house looks lovely, Ellie," he observed, handing me a bottle of wine. "How are you feeling about today?" "Nervous," I admitted, but resolved. This needs to happen. Greg and Jennifer's family arrived next, Tyler and Emma in tow. Tyler, nearly 18 and headed to engineering school in the fall, gave me a quick, awkward hug. Emma, 14, and in that self-conscious stage of adolescence, offered a shy smile and a compliment on my earrings. "Something smells amazing," Greg said, handing me a bouquet of store-bought flowers. The gesture was unexpectedly touching. He'd remembered that I preferred flowers to wine as a hostess gift. "Slow-roasted lamb," I told him. "Your father's recipe." A shadow of emotion crossed his face. "Dad's Sunday roast. I haven't had that in years." Before I could respond, the doorbell rang again. Daniel stood there with Noah, who immediately asked if he could show Tyler his new gaming device. "Melissa's just parking the car," Daniel explained. "She had a work call that ran long." Sure enough, Melissa appeared moments later, her expression carefully neutral as she took in the scene. The family gathered in the entryway of the house she believed should be sold, Martin Chen standing discreetly nearby, the photographs of Robert visible on the wall behind me. "Thank you for coming," I said sincerely, stepping back to welcome her in. "The whole family's here," she observed, handing me a precisely wrapped package. "Even Mr. Chen. Martin's here to help answer any technical questions about the proposal I'm going to share," I explained, accepting the gift. A jar of imported Italian honey, one of Robert's favorites. The thoughtfulness of it surprised me. "I see." Melissa's gaze swept the entryway once more. "Well, I'm looking forward to hearing this mysterious proposal." We moved to the dining room, where I'd arranged the seating carefully, mixing the families rather than allowing them to cluster in their usual groupings. Noah between Jennifer and me, Tyler next to Melissa, Emma beside Daniel, and Sophia between her father and Greg. Martin sat at the far end of the table, opposite me. As I served the meal, Robert's roast lamb, rosemary potatoes, spring vegetables from the garden, conversation gradually relaxed. The grandchildren discussed their summer plans. The adults exchanged polite comments about work and community events, and for a brief time, it almost felt like the family gatherings we'd had when Robert was alive. It wasn't until dessert, Robert's favorite lemon cake, that Melissa brought the conversation to its intended purpose. "This has been lovely, Ellie," she said, setting down her fork. "But I believe you mentioned a proposal you wanted to discuss. Something about family. Resources." The table fell silent. Even Noah sensed the shift in atmosphere, looking up from his cake with sudden attentiveness. "Yes," I said, meeting her gaze steadily. "But let's finish dessert first. Then we can move to the living room where I've prepared some materials." 20 minutes later, we were all settled in the living room, the adults on sofas and chairs, the grandchildren perched on cushions or the window seat. Martin sat slightly apart, his legal pad balanced on his knee, ready to address technical questions. I took a deep breath and began. First, I want to thank you all for coming today. It means a great deal to me that we can gather as a family, even when there are differences to resolve. I looked around the room, making eye contact with each person. As you know, there's been some disagreement about this house, whether I should continue living here or sell it now so that Greg and Melissa can receive their inheritance immediately. The grandchildren exchanged glances. Clearly, they had all been aware of the situation to varying degrees. Robert created a trust that gives me lifetime rights to our home, I continued, with Greg and Melissa as the ultimate beneficiaries. The trust was his way of ensuring both my security and your future inheritance. I picked up a folder from the side table and removed several documents. However, the house is just one part of what Robert left behind. There are also investment accounts, life insurance proceeds, the vacation property in Vermont, and the education trusts for Tyler, Sophia, Emma, and Noah. I handed each adult a summary sheet I had prepared with Martin's help. As you can see, while the house represents a significant portion of the estate's value, these other assets are substantial as well. What I'm proposing is a reallocation of some of these resources to address immediate family needs, while respecting the integrity of the trust regarding the house. Greg studied the sheet, his financial advisor's mind quickly grasping the figures. You're suggesting liquidating the Vermont property? Yes, I confirmed. None of us uses it regularly anymore. The maintenance costs are significant, and the current market value is excellent. The proceeds would be divided into 2 portions. I handed out a second sheet detailing my proposal. Half would go directly to you and Melissa now, an advance on your inheritance that doesn't require selling this house. The other half would supplement the grandchildren's education trusts, ensuring that all 4 of them have sufficient funds for their college educations, including Sophia's Princeton expenses. Melissa frowned, studying the numbers. This doesn't approach the value we would receive if the house were sold. No, I acknowledged. But it provides substantial immediate funds while honoring Robert's explicit wishes regarding our home, and it ensures that his grandchildren, whom he loved dearly, receive the educational opportunities he valued so highly. I also notice, Melissa continued, that you're proposing to redirect some of the investment income that currently goes to you under the trust terms. That's correct, I said. I don't need all of that income for my living expenses. I'm proposing that a portion of it go directly to the grandchildren's education funds each year, with quarterly statements to all of you showing exactly how the money is being used. Tyler, who had been listening intently, spoke up. So basically, you're giving up some of your own income to help with our college costs? Yes, I said simply. Your grandfather would want that. Education was vitally important to him. Noah raised his hand as if in school. Does this mean we can still have Christmas here? Mom said we might not be able to anymore. The innocent question cut to the heart of what was really at stake. I looked at Melissa, whose expression had softened almost imperceptibly at her son's words. This house will always be open to all of you, I assured Noah. That's part of what I'm trying to preserve. Not just a physical structure, but a family home where memories are made and traditions continue. Emma, usually so quiet, unexpectedly spoke up. Is that why Grandpa Robert made the trust? So we would still have this place? Exactly, I said, grateful for her understanding. He wanted to protect both my right to live in our home and the family's connection to it. Daniel, who had been silently reviewing the numbers, looked up. This is a generous proposal, Ellie. More generous than we had any right to expect, given the legal standing of the trust. It's not about legal standing, I said. It's about finding a solution that honors Robert's intentions while addressing real family needs. Your children's education, for instance, is something he would absolutely prioritize. Melissa set the papers aside, her expression unreadable. May I speak with you privately for a moment, Ellie? The request surprised me. Of course. We stepped into Robert's study, closing the door behind us. Melissa moved to the window, looking out at the garden Robert had loved. Dad spent hours out there, she said unexpectedly. Even when I was a teenager, angry at the world and especially at him for the divorce, he'd be gardening, and somehow I'd end up out there with him, pulling weeds and talking about everything I was mad about. The memory, one she'd never shared before, caught me off guard. He told me those were some of his most treasured times with you. She turned from the window. This proposal, it's not what we asked for, but it's thoughtful. Fair even. Dad would approve. That's all I've wanted, I said softly, to honor what Robert would want for all of us. Melissa's professional composure slipped slightly. When Dad first introduced us, I was determined not to like you. You were younger than my mother, successful in your own right. I was sure you were after his money. The blunt admission hung between us. But you made him happy, she continued. Happier than I'd seen him since before the divorce. And you were kind to me even when I was cold to you. That wasn't easy to reconcile with my preconceptions. Blended families are complicated, I acknowledged. We all did our best. Did we? Melissa looked at me directly. I'm not sure I did. And after Dad died, it was easier to think of you as just someone standing between us and our inheritance than as someone who was also grieving him. The unexpected vulnerability in her admission moved me. Grief makes us focus on what we've lost, I said carefully. For me, it was Robert. For you, perhaps it was the future expectation of this house returning fully to the Wilson family. She nodded slowly. Something like that. She glanced around the study, at Robert's books still lining the shelves, his awards and photographs still displayed. You've kept so much of him here. This is our home, I said simply. His presence is part of what makes it home for me. Melissa was quiet for a moment. Then, I'll support your proposal. I can't promise I won't still wish for a different arrangement sometimes, but I won't fight this. And I'll make sure the children continue to see this as their family home too. The concession was more than I had dared hope for. Thank you, Melissa. That would mean everything to me. And it would have meant everything to Robert. When we returned to the living room, the atmosphere had visibly shifted. Greg was showing Martin some figures on a calculator, Jennifer was deep in conversation with Tyler about his college plans, and Daniel was helping Noah and Emma set up a board game on the coffee table. Sophia looked up as we entered, her eyes moving quickly between her mother and me, searching for clues about our private conversation. I gave her a small nod, and her shoulders relaxed visibly. Well, Melissa announced to the room, Ellie's proposal is reasonable and addresses many of our concerns. I'm prepared to accept it as outlined, with perhaps some minor details to iron out regarding the timing of the Vermont property sale. Greg looked up in surprise, clearly not having expected this response from his sister. I agree. It's a fair compromise. Martin caught my eye from across the room, his expression showing both approval and a hint of surprise at the relatively smooth resolution. Then we have an agreement in principle, I said, relief washing through me. Martin can draft the necessary amendments to implement these changes, and we can move forward together. As the afternoon progressed, the tension that had permeated our family gatherings since Robert's death gradually eased. We weren't suddenly one big happy family. There were still moments of awkwardness, old patterns that emerged briefly before being consciously set aside. But there was also laughter, shared memories of Robert, and perhaps most importantly, a sense of continuing connection to this home that had anchored the family through so many changes. Later, as everyone was preparing to leave, Sophia pulled me aside near the front door. Whatever you said to Mom in the study, thank you. she whispered. I haven't seen her this at peace with anything related to Grandpa Robert in, well, maybe ever. I hugged her close. Sometimes we just need to be reminded of what really matters. As I stood on the porch waving goodbye to the departing cars, I felt Robert's presence beside me more strongly than I had since his death. Not as a ghost or supernatural visitation, but as the living influence he continued to have on all of us. The values he had instilled, the love he had given, the family he had cherished despite its imperfections. The house behind me wasn't just a valuable asset or a piece of property. It was the vessel that contained our shared history and would shelter new memories yet to be made. In protecting it, I had honored not just Robert's legal wishes, but the deeper legacy he had entrusted to me, the care of the family we had built together, in all its complicated, beautiful humanity. I turned back toward the open door, toward the home that would remain mine for as long as I needed it, secure in the knowledge that someday it would pass to the next generation, carrying with it not bitterness or conflict, but the values and love that had made it a true family home. 6 months after our family gathering, the Vermont property sold for more than we'd anticipated. The market had improved unexpectedly, resulting in proceeds that allowed for even more generous distributions to Greg and Melissa, while still significantly bolstering the grandchildren's education funds. As Martin Chen had predicted, the resolution of our conflict had strengthened family bonds rather than weakening them. On a crisp October afternoon, I sat in my garden, enjoying the vibrant autumn colors that had transformed the maple trees lining our property. The air held that distinctive fall scent, earthy and rich with hints of wood smoke from neighboring homes. I was pruning Robert's roses for the winter when I heard the gate swing open. "Grandma Ellie?" Sophia's voice called out. "Are you back here?" "By the rose bushes," I answered, setting down my pruning shears and pulling off my gardening gloves. Sophia appeared around the corner of the house, her Princeton sweatshirt now worn with the pride of an actual student rather than an aspiring one. She'd completed her first month of college and was home for a brief weekend visit. Behind her came Melissa, carrying a bakery box and looking more relaxed than I'd seen her in years. "We brought apple cider donuts from that orchard Dad always loved," Sophia announced, bending to kiss my cheek. "Mom thought we could have tea in the garden since it's so nice out." The casual suggestion, so normal yet so meaningful given our history, warmed me more than the autumn sunshine. "That sounds wonderful. The kettle should still be hot. I had a cup earlier." "I'll get everything," Melissa offered, already heading toward the kitchen door. "You two catch up." When she'd disappeared inside, Sophia flopped onto the garden bench beside me. "College is intense," she declared. "Amazing, but intense. My physics professor is this brilliant woman who worked at CERN, and she's terrifying and awesome all at once." I smiled at her enthusiasm. "Your grandfather would be so proud. He always said education was the one thing no one could ever take. From you." "Mom says the same thing," Sophia said, surprising me. "Actually, she talks about Grandpa a lot more lately. Good stuff. Memories and things he taught her. It's nice." Before I could respond, Melissa emerged from the house carrying a tray with teapot, cups, and the promised donuts. She'd arranged everything on Robert's favorite serving tray, the one with hand-painted birds that we'd found at an antique store in Vermont during one of our rare family vacations together. "The kitchen looks wonderful with the new curtains," Melissa commented as she set the tray on the garden table. "Very cheerful." "Thank you," I said, genuinely touched by her notice of the small change. The old curtains had been Robert's choice, practical but rather plain. The new ones, with their pattern of herbs and butterflies, had been a small way of making the space more reflective of my own taste, while still honoring the room he'd designed so carefully. We settled into conversation that flowed more easily than it ever had before. Sophia's college adventures, Melissa's recent case victory, news about the rest of the family. Greg and Jennifer were considering a kitchen renovation. Emma had joined the school debate team, and Noah had discovered a passion for cooking, of all things. He calls me for recipes at least once a week, I told them, delighted by this new connection with my youngest step-grandchild. Last Sunday it was chocolate chip cookies. He was so proud when they turned out well. Daniel says the kitchen is constantly a disaster, Melissa said with a small laugh. But he's encouraging it. Says it reminds him of when he used to cook with his grandmother. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the garden as we talked, highlighting the ruby and gold tones of the fall foliage. In this peaceful moment, it was hard to remember the tension that had once threatened to tear our family apart. Yet I knew the change hadn't come easily or automatically. It had required effort from everyone, small gestures of goodwill, consistent, reinforcement of new patterns of interaction. After Sophia wandered inside to look for a book she'd left on her last visit, Melissa turned to me with a more serious expression. I wanted to let you know that I've recommended Martin Chen to several colleagues, she said. He's an excellent trust attorney. The work he did for Dad was impeccable. The compliment to Martin was really an acknowledgement of Robert's foresight and my own steadfastness in honoring his wishes. He'll appreciate the referrals, I said simply. Melissa hesitated, then continued. I've also been thinking about our own estate planning. Daniel and I have put it off for too long, especially considering my legal background. I should know better. It's often hardest to apply professional knowledge to our personal lives, I observed. Yes. She absently traced the pattern on her teacup. I've been thinking about creating a similar arrangement for our home. Lifetime rights for the surviving spouse, then to the children. After seeing how Dad's trust protected your rights while still preserving our inheritance interest. It makes sense. The admission felt like a significant victory, not just acceptance of our situation, but actual appreciation for the wisdom in Robert's approach. That seems very sensible, I said carefully, not wanting to overemphasize the moment. I also wanted to ask your advice about something, Melissa continued, surprising me further. Noah's birthday is next month, and I was thinking of giving him one of Dad's architectural books, the one with the famous bridges. Noah's been showing interest in engineering lately, and it seems like something Dad would have wanted him to have. The request touched me deeply. Robert's architectural library had remained largely untouched in his study, except for the few volumes I occasionally referenced. The idea of passing selected books to the grandchildren as they showed interest in relevant subjects felt exactly right. I think that's a wonderful idea, I said warmly. Robert would be delighted, and I'm sure there are other books that would be perfect for each of the grandchildren as their interests develop. Melissa nodded, looking relieved. I wasn't sure if you were ready to distribute any of his personal things yet. I know how much they mean to you. The books were meant to be used to inspire, I said. Keeping them all on shelves where no one opens them isn't what Robert would want. When Sophia rejoined us, book in hand, the conversation shifted to lighter topics again. But the brief exchange had crystallized something important. We were finding our way toward a new kind of family relationship, one built on mutual respect rather than tension and suspicion. After they left, I returned to the garden to finish the rose pruning. The afternoon's visit had left me thoughtful, reflecting on how much had changed since that confrontational family meeting 6 months ago. The truce we'd forged that day had gradually transformed into something more genuine. Not perfect harmony, certainly, but a functional family relationship that honored both Robert's memory and the connections between us all. The following week brought another unexpected development. Greg called one evening as I was settling in with a book, his tone uncharacteristically hesitant. Ellie, I have a somewhat unusual request, he began after our initial pleasantries. Jennifer and I are finally doing that kitchen renovation we've talked about for years. We found a contractor we trust, but we're struggling with the design elements. Jennifer mentioned that you and Dad redesigned your kitchen together, and it's always been so functional yet beautiful. You'd like some input? I guessed, surprised but pleased. Actually, we were hoping you might consider coming over to look at the space and offer some thoughts. Dad always said you had the best eye for how a room should flow. The invitation was significant, not just a casual request for advice, but an acknowledgement of my role in creating the home they had so often admired. I'd be happy to help, I told him. When were you thinking? 2 days later, I found myself in Greg and Jennifer's kitchen, surrounded by paint samples, cabinet door styles, and countertop materials. Jennifer, whom I'd always found somewhat distant, welcomed me with unexpected warmth. We're completely overwhelmed by choices, she admitted, gesturing to the chaos of samples. Greg wants functionality above all. I'm focused on aesthetics, and neither of us has your knack for combining both. Robert was the real talent, I demurred. I just had opinions he happened to value. Dad always said you transformed his bachelor architect concepts into actual livable spaces, Greg countered, joining us with coffee mugs. He said his designs only came to life when you added your perspective. The characterization was generous but not entirely accurate. Robert had been a gifted architect with a deep understanding of how spaces worked. But it was true that our collaboration had elevated his designs, adding warmth and practicality to his more theoretical concepts. I'd forgotten that he had spoken of our partnership in those terms to his children. For the next 2 hours, we discussed kitchen layouts, lighting considerations, and the merits of various materials. Greg took notes as I explained how Robert had approached the flow between cooking areas and dining spaces, the importance of task lighting, and the value of designing with both current needs and future flexibility in mind. This is why we needed you, Jennifer said as we finalized a layout that accommodated both her aesthetic preferences and Greg's practical requirements. You see the whole picture, not just the individual elements. As I prepared to leave, Greg walked me to my car, the autumn air crisp against our faces. Thank you for this, he said, gesturing back toward the house. But also for everything else. The way you've handled the whole situation with the trust in the inheritance. I looked at him, noting how the afternoon sunlight emphasized the resemblance to his father around his eyes. I've only tried to do what Robert would have wanted. I know, Greg said quietly. But you could have been much less gracious about it, considering how we approached the situation initially. That letter. He shook his head, clearly embarrassed by the memory. Water under the bridge, I assured him. What matters is where we are now. And where we are is better, he acknowledged. Tyler mentioned that you've been helping him with his college applications. That means a lot to him, to all of us. He's a bright young man. Robert would have enjoyed seeing him navigate this stage of life. Greg nodded, a flicker of sadness crossing his features. Sometimes I forget how much Dad's missing. All these milestones he should be here for. He'd be proud of you, I said gently. Not just of Tyler, but of you. How you've stepped up as a father. How you're handling the family business matters. Even how you've worked through this inheritance situation with maturity. Greg looked momentarily startled, then grateful. That means a lot coming from you, Ellie. Thank you. As October gave way to November, the holidays approached. The first since our family conflict had been resolved. Thanksgiving had traditionally rotated between homes, but Christmas had always been at Robert's and my house, a tradition dating back to when Greg and Melissa were teenagers. In the uncertainty following our conflict and resolution, no one had specifically addressed the holiday plans. I was considering how to broach the subject when Melissa called one evening in mid-November. After some general conversation about Sophia's upcoming return for Thanksgiving break, she cleared her throat. We've been talking, Greg and Daniel and I, about Christmas this year, she began. We thought, if you're comfortable with it, that we should return to having it at your house. The children's house, she corrected herself. The family home. The careful phrasing, acknowledging both my current residence and the family's future inheritance, wasn't lost on me. "I'd love that," I said simply. "I've missed hosting Christmas here." "Wonderful," Melissa sounded relieved. "We thought Christmas Eve dinner and then presents and breakfast on Christmas morning, like always." The children are very excited about returning to tradition. After hanging up, I walked through the house, mentally preparing for hosting the family Christmas again. The living room would need the large tree in the bay window. The dining room could accommodate everyone comfortably with the table's extension, leaves. The guest rooms would need fresh linens for those staying overnight. The planning energized me in a way I hadn't expected. Last Christmas had been a quiet, somewhat melancholy affair with just Patty and a few other friends joining me for dinner. The thought of filling the house with family again, with the laughter of grandchildren, the familiar chaos of gift-giving, the continuation of traditions Robert had loved, felt like reclaiming something precious I'd feared might be permanently lost. Over the next few weeks, I decorated the house with special attention to Robert's favorite holiday elements: the collection of wooden nutcrackers he'd accumulated, the angel tree topper his mother had passed down, the advent calendar with tiny doors that the grandchildren had always fought over opening. But I also incorporated some new touches: a different wreath for the front door, candles with winter scents I'd discovered and loved, a few new ornaments that had caught my eye. When Christmas Eve arrived, the house was ready, glowing with lights and greenery, filled with delicious aromas from the kitchen where I'd been preparing Robert's traditional beef Wellington and Yorkshire pudding alongside some new recipes I'd wanted to try. Patty arrived first, bearing wine and her signature snark. "Look at you, hosting the family Christmas as if they didn't try to evict you 6 months ago," she observed as she helped me arrange appetizers. "Are you sure I can't accidentally spill something on Lawyer Barbie's designer outfit? Just a small stain as a reminder?" "Behave," I warned her, though I couldn't help smiling. "Things are better now. Really better, not just superficially polite." Patty looked skeptical but nodded. "Fine, I'll be on my best behavior. But if anyone makes a single comment about when this house is ours, all bets are off." "Fair enough," I conceded, knowing such comments were unlikely given the new understanding we'd reached. The family arrived in stages. First Greg and Jennifer, with Tyler and Emma, then Daniel and Noah. Melissa and Sophia would join later, after Melissa finished some urgent work matter. The house quickly filled with the familiar sounds of family gathering: teen cousins catching up, Emma showing Jennifer the handmade ornaments she'd created in art class, Noah immediately heading to the kitchen to check on dinner preparations. "Something smells amazing," he declared, peering into the oven. "Is that Grandpa Robert's special gravy simmering?" "It is," I confirmed, touched that he remembered. "Would you like to help me finish it? You're the chef in training, after all." Noah's face lit up with pride as he carefully accepted the wooden spoon I offered. For the next 15 minutes, we worked side by side, adjusting seasonings and discussing the finer points of roux-based sauces. His genuine interest in cooking, an interest that connected him to memories of Robert, who had often involved the grandchildren in holiday meal preparations, felt like a precious gift. By the time Melissa and Sophia arrived, the house had settled into the comfortable rhythm of family gathering. Greg was tending the fire in the living room, Jennifer and Emma were setting the dining room table with Robert's mother's china, and Tyler was engaged in what appeared to be a serious chess match with Daniel. "It looks exactly the same," Sophia exclaimed as she entered, taking in the decorations, the familiar arrangement of furniture, the family photographs on the mantel, but also different somehow. New candles? New candles, new wreath, new throw pillows, I confirmed, accepting her hug. But the same heart. Melissa followed more slowly, her expression softening as she surveyed the scene. "You've kept all of Dad's favorite Christmas things," she observed quietly. "Of course," I said simply. "They're part of what makes this house a home at Christmas." As we gathered around the dining table, extended to its full length to accommodate everyone. I felt Robert's absence keenly, but also his enduring presence in the traditions we maintained, the recipes we prepared, the stories we shared. Greg raised his glass in the first toast, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "To family," he said, looking around the table. "To memories of Dad, to Ellie for hosting us in this home that means so much to all of us, and to many more holidays together." "To family," everyone echoed, glasses raised. The dinner unfolded with a warmth that had been missing in our gatherings since Robert's death. Conversation flowed easily. Stories about Robert emerged naturally. Some I'd heard before, others new to me. And even Patty gradually relaxed her protective stance, eventually engaging Melissa in what appeared to be a genuinely amicable discussion about a local preservation project. After dinner, as we moved to the living room for coffee and dessert, Noah approached me somewhat shyly, a small wrapped package in his hands. "I made you something, Grandma Ellie," he said, presenting the gift. "Mom said we're doing presents tomorrow, but I wanted to give you this one tonight, just from me." Inside the carefully wrapped box was a handmade cookbook, pages printed from Noah's computer, bound together with ribbon, containing recipes we had discussed over the phone during his recent cooking adventures. Each recipe included notes in his careful handwriting about what he'd learned or changed, along with a few photographs of his successful creations. "I put all the recipes you helped me with," he explained earnestly. "And I left space to add more as we cook other things together." The thoughtfulness of the gift moved me deeply. "This is wonderful, Noah. I'll treasure it." "Mom helped me bind it," he admitted. "But the recipes and notes are all mine." I glanced up to find Melissa watching us, a soft smile on her face. She gave me a small nod, acknowledgement of this growing bond between her son and me, approval of the connection that transcended the tensions that had once existed between us. Later that night, after the younger grandchildren had gone to bed in the guest rooms and the adults had settled into conversation groups around the living room, I slipped away to the kitchen for a quiet moment. The house felt alive again in a way it hadn't for years, filled with the energy of family, with overlapping conversations and spontaneous laughter, with the continuation of old traditions and the creation of new ones. Standing at the kitchen window, looking out at the garden Robert had loved, now dormant under winter's cover but waiting to bloom again in spring, I felt a profound sense of peace. The home we had created together remained a sanctuary, not just for me but for all of us who carried pieces of Robert in our hearts. "You okay?" Patty's voice came from the doorway. "You disappeared." "Just taking a moment," I assured her. "It's been a wonderful evening." Patty crossed the kitchen to stand beside me at the window. "They're different," she observed. "All of them. More genuine, less calculating." "People rise to meet the expectations we set," I said. "When we stopped framing our relationship as a battle over assets and started treating it as a family finding its way forward after loss, everything shifted." "Robert would be pleased," Patty acknowledged. "He always wanted a unified family, even with all the step relationships and complications." "It's what he tried to create for all of us," I agreed. "A home where everyone belonged, where connections mattered more than legal definitions of family." From the living room came the sound of Sophia's laughter, bright and uninhibited, followed by Greg's deeper chuckle. The simple domestic soundtrack spoke volumes about how far we'd come. When I rejoined the family, I found them engaged in an impromptu carol sing-along, with Tyler surprisingly taking the lead at the piano, an instrument he'd learned at Robert's encouragement years ago. I settled into Robert's favorite armchair, watching as Melissa leaned against Daniel's shoulder, as Emma helped Noah follow along in the carol book, as Jennifer rested her hand lightly on Greg's back while he turned pages for Tyler. This was the legacy Robert had truly wanted to leave, not just a house or financial assets, but a family that remained connected despite differences and challenges. By standing firm on the trust he had created, I hadn't just protected my right to remain in our home. I had preserved the foundation from which these renewed family bonds could grow. Christmas morning dawned clear and cold, sunlight sparkling on frost-covered gardens. I woke early, as was my habit, and made my way quietly downstairs to start coffee and breakfast preparations before the rest of the household stirred. To my surprise, I found Melissa already in the kitchen, dressed in pajamas and a robe, measuring coffee grounds into the machine. "You beat me to it," I said, tightening the belt of my own robe. She looked up with a smile that held none of the guardedness I'd grown accustomed to over the years. Dad always said the best part of Christmas morning was the quiet hour before everyone else woke up. I thought I'd see if he was right. I nodded, unexpectedly touched by this small connection to Robert's private rituals. He used to come down, around 5, make coffee, and just sit in the dimness watching the tree lights, said it centered him for the chaos to come. "Mind if I join you in that tradition?" Melissa asked. "I'd like that very much," I told her honestly. We carried our coffee cups to the living room, where the tree lights cast a soft, multicolored glow in the pre-dawn dimness. The stockings hung in a neat row on the mantel, now including new ones I'd added for Patty and Daniel, completing the family circle. Presents were arranged beneath the tree, wrapping paper gleaming in the gentle light. For nearly half an hour, we sat in comfortable silence, occasionally commenting on a particular ornament or decoration, but mostly just sharing the peaceful moment. It was perhaps the longest time Melissa and I had ever spent in each other's company, without tension or guardedness, and it felt like a precious gift, one Robert would have valued above any material present. "Thank you," Melissa said finally, as the sounds of stirring could be heard from upstairs. "For fighting to keep this home in the family, for understanding what it means to all of us. I didn't see it clearly before, but I do now." "It was never just about the house itself," I said softly. "It was about preserving the heart of what Robert built for us, a place where we all belong, where his presence remains alive in every room, every tradition." Melissa nodded, her eyes reflecting the colored lights from the tree. "We'll protect it too when the time comes. I promise you that." Before I could respond, Noah appeared in the doorway, hair tousled from sleep, eyes wide with Christmas excitement. "Is it time for presents yet?" he asked hopefully. Melissa laughed, the moment of intimacy gently closing but not forgotten. "Coffee and breakfast first, then presents. That's the rule, remember?" Soon the house was fully awake, filled with the familiar Christmas morning commotion, the aroma of cinnamon rolls baking, Robert's mother's recipe now being prepared by Noah under my guidance, excited voices as stockings were discovered, Patty making droll commentary on her reindeer-patterned socks. The day unfolded as Christmas should, with gifts exchanged, memories shared, new traditions blending seamlessly with old ones. As I watched the family gathered in the living room, Greg showing Tyler how to use the new camera he'd received, Jennifer helping Emma arrange her new art supplies, Sophia deep in conversation with Daniel about her college courses, I felt Robert's absence, but also his enduring influence on all of us. He had created this family, piece by piece, relationship by relationship, and his foresight in protecting our home had ultimately protected these bonds as well. The trust he established hadn't just secured my right to remain in our house. It had preserved the foundation from which our family could rebuild after his loss. By standing firm against pressure to sell, I hadn't just protected my own interests, but had upheld Robert's vision of a family that remained connected through generations, centered around the home we had created together. Later that afternoon, as we all bundled up for a walk through the frost-covered garden, another of Robert's Christmas traditions, I paused on the back porch, watching as the family moved ahead of me down the garden path. Melissa turned back, noticing my hesitation. "Coming, Ellie?" she called, her breath visible in the cold air. "Right behind you," I assured her, taking one last glance at the house, our home, secure and filled with life once more. I stepped forward to join my family, knowing that wherever Robert was, he would be pleased with what we had preserved. Not just a house or an asset, but the heart of what he had built for all of us. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.